So this is a bit of a cautionary tale. I recently assumed that my client knew what a license agreement was. So when I sent one over, when we were coming to the end of a project, a big project we've been working on for a few months, they just thought I'd betrayed their trust. When I put this license agreement in front of them and said, once the license agreement's signed, I'll give you the files, it was like shock horror. Like, what? It came as a shock to me that they knew nothing about license agreements. So yeah, here's what I learned the hard way. So this has been a long-term client of mine, and things were going great. We've been working on a few projects, but this was the first project that was coming to fruition. There's been a lot of stop-start sort of projects going on. Yeah, but this one was coming to fruition. Once we've come to the end of it, I'm going to get these artworks, these illustrations over to them. And like I say, I've just casually said, okay, I'll get a license agreement over to you. Once that gets signed, I'll give you the files. This was in an email, by the way. Now I get a phone call a couple of hours later, and it was like I'd thrown a curveball, or I'd thrown a grenade into the room. So I had to explain what a license agreement was. And bearing in mind they've been in business for a good few years now, doing what they do and working with other artists and illustrators, I naively assumed they knew what I was talking about. But they saw it, or at least one of them did, as some sort of betrayal of trust, as if I was going to hold these files hostage, the ones that I'd been working on for a few months, And then they started sort of saying things to me about, well, why haven't we discussed license agreements before? And my response to that was, well, we've never come to the end of a project before, so we've never got to this stage. But like I say, I was naively assuming that they knew a thing or two about it. So I had to explain to them that, look, as a freelancer, by UK law, by default, I own the copyright to those illustrations that I've been working on. Now, if I was employed by them, it'd be a completely different story. We wouldn't have even been having that conversation. But no. By law, I own that copyright, and so a license agreement it's an agreement, right? It's not a disagreement. We both agree the terms on which that artwork can be used. In this case, it's for sort of wall art and some merchandise. So that's what I put in the agreement. And it wasn't there. It wasn't the kind of like, right, this is set in stone, sign it or else kind of thing. It was nothing like that. It was just, okay, here's let's talk about this. This is the agreement. We can talk about it and come to an agreement. But this was all news to them, and right out of the blue. So I had to explain, look, even though these illustrations are done for their brand, this is in no way me claiming rights over their brand or anything like that. Obviously, their brand is their brand, but the illustrations that are done within the brand were mine. And so therefore, by having a license agreement in place, we agree the terms under which they can use my artwork, because I'm like I say, the copyright rests with the artist and the illustrator. So yeah, really had to sort of explain all of this to them. And so yeah, this is a cautionary tale. If you know your rights as a freelance artist, an illustrator or a photographer, any freelance creative, know your rights up front. That you own the copyright to that artwork. And I would say definitely talk about license agreements early on. Just speak to your client and say to them, have you heard of a license agreement? Do you sign license agreements, etc.? Contracts should be signed. I'm all for trust, and I'm all for building up a relationship, of course, with a client. But at the end of the day, it's a business transaction, right? And this is what I had to explain to my client. I said, a license agreement is obviously in place to safeguard them so that there's no future action down the line, and to sort of protect the artwork that I've created, so that it's just used for the purposes that we've agreed. And all we're doing is we'd verbally agreed it. We talked about merchandise and about wall art, etc., canvases, etc., but we hadn't just literally put that in writing. And that's all the license agreement was doing. It was just putting in writing what we'd verbally agreed anyway. So yeah, just to clarify, you own the copyright to your artwork as a freelancer, illustrator, and artist or designer. By having a license, you're giving your client permission to use your artwork in the ways that you agree to. If the client wants to own copyright of that artwork, you can agree to that as well, but you should charge for that. So don't do what I did and assume that your client knows all about license agreements, no matter how long they've been in business. And I say this as well because it was thrown back at me in the conversation that, well, none of our other artists use license agreements. And I had to say, well, that's on them. That's how they run their business, and that's fine. If that's the way they want to do it, that's on them. You can't force a client to sign anything they don't want to sign. But the way I run my business, as a freelancer, a business of one, is I like to have things locked down and in place, and just to cross the T's, dot the I's, and make sure, you know, everyone's happy with the agreement. It's a license agreement at the end of the day. It's not a license disagreement. So yeah, bring it up early and make sure your client isn't blindsided further down the line, you know. And that was my mistake. That's where I fucked up. That's the title of this video. And you know, it did feel like I'd fucked up because I should have brought it up sooner. I have to take some responsibility for that, 100%. You know, having been in this game a while now, like I say, I assumed that they knew what I was talking about, but no, they didn't. So never assume anything. Bring it up early before you get talking about projects, etc. Find out from them, do they work with contracts and license agreements, and then, you know, you can make that decision from there. So my mistake wasn't the license itself; it was just not bringing it up sooner in the relationship. And disclaimer, by the way, I'm not a lawyer. This is just my experiences. This is just what I've learned, and I want to share with you, so hopefully you avoid the pitfalls. Because it's not a nice feeling, you know, when a client thinks you've betrayed their trust. That's a horrible feeling. No one wants that. I certainly didn't want that at all. And I went to lengths to sort of rectify the situation and keep the relationship healthy, which it is. It's all good now. It's not a problem at all. Went for a coffee the next day with them, and it wasn't even mentioned, to be fair. We just talked about the next job, you know, the next project going on. So it's all good. If you've had any weird experiences with license agreements or just with clients in general, yeah, let us know in the comments. Drop something in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, have a good one. I'll see you soon.